This is an odd one. All right, get ready.
I'm literally shaking right now because I just had a man approach me in a parking lot and it went fine. And I'm going to tell you why it went fine and how to address it, because it was in a book I read and this is how you're supposed to address it, but it scared me. I'm literally shaking. So this guy, I am alone with my son, by myself, a woman, and a male approached me in a parking lot. He's
She has a son? I thought she was hot for a minute there, but ugh.
excuse me, miss, and I don't know why in the hell he was approaching me or what he was trying to do. And before he was probably 30 feet from me when he said, excuse me, ma'am. And I turned around and I literally yelled at him and I said, do not approach me. And he immediately started going in the other direction. And I just kept saying it over and over and over. I said, do not approach me. Do not approach me. And he, of course, got
She's a freaking nutcase, dude. She's a freaking nut. What the hell? What the hell?
What the F did it? He started cussing and yelling, what's your problem? And I looked at him and he actually then crossed a couple cars down from my car. And he didn't come anywhere near me. He crossed a couple cars down from my car and was like, continuing to cuss and say, what's your problem? And I said, you do not approach women in a parking lot. I just kept saying, do not approach me. Yeah. You do not approach women in a parking lot.
Everybody knows that. Everybody knows you don't approach a woman in a parking lot. Who would do such a thing? Who would do such a thing?
Yelling it. No male should ever approach a woman in a parking lot. Ever. No male should ever approach a woman in a parking lot.
Never, ever. Don't do it, guys. That, everybody knows you should not do that. Of course. Of course. A parking lot. It's a parking lot, guys. Think before you act. Come on.
And if a male does approach you, you need to turn around and use the strongest voice that you can possibly use with them. Don't be polite. They need to literally screw off. No male should be approaching you in a parking lot.
Yeah, don't be polite. There's no reason to be polite to somebody who would approach you in a parking lot.
I'm literally shaking right now.
I'm literally shaking. I said this is just blatant bigotry, okay? So, here we go. I'm going to walk you down the line of logic, and I've had this conversation in this fight with numerous people now. Pixie was the last person, but I've done this with numerous people, okay? You might look at this, okay? You might look at this and say, okay, look. Men are actually bigger than women. And women do get beat up and they do get abducted and this happens, okay? But it happens such a small percentage of the time that it doesn't make sense to all of a sudden start applying this to all men that you see in a parking lot, okay? It is not common enough for you to start acting like this is what every man is going to do, right? Secondly, if you think it's still justified, the reason I call this bigotry is because, and I don't like using that word generally, but the reason I call this bigotry is because I don't know if you know this, but actually, black men, on average, are bigger than white men. They also build muscle more easily. They have higher testosterone rates. They also have lower body fat percentages. Also, black men are more successful within sports that are about running faster and jumping higher. So all of the things that women would be afraid of versus men, white men would be afraid of with black men. Does it make sense now? For any time a black man's walking behind me on the sidewalk, I go over to the other side of the road because I think he's going to attack me? No, of course not. That's ridiculous. This is something that I call what is it? The predator syndrome? Is that what it is? I don't remember. I want to say it's the predator syndrome, where men actually start to feel like they're dangerous and start having to walk on eggshells around women because they feel dangerous. Women make them feel like they're dangerous. Women make them think oh, I'm walking behind somebody on the sidewalk. Now I should be the one to go somewhere else because I'm the dangerous one. So I got to go do something else now. I got to back up. I got to get away from her. I got to go cross the road. I'm the dangerous person, so I got to go somewhere else. That is bullcrap, okay? That is bullcrap. Just because some men out there are dangerous does not mean that other men are dangerous. And this is not the not all men argument. This is the you're a bigot argument because, yeah, black men actually do commit crimes at a higher rate. It's actually true. For reals. They really do. It's like 6% of America commit like 50% of violent crimes. Does that mean that we can all just be scared of black men now? No. We would all call that bigoted. And it's not bigoted because it's bad for black people. It's not bigoted because it has negative outcomes. It's bigoted because the line of logic is actually fallacious. You can't say, well, this group of people does this more often, therefore I can assume each individual is going to do that. That's not how logic works. That's not how statistics work. It is fallacious to think that just because something happens more often with a group, therefore each individual is more likely to do that. That's not how that works. So, yes, these people who are pushing this sort of bullcrap, they are bigoted, they are crazy, they are nutcases, and this should not be okay. It's not something that people should be like, oh, it's okay. It's just scary little women. No big a deal. Sandloot said this has to be satire, right? And what do you know? Femoid Lav quote tweeted this. Said the men in the replies somehow live in a dream world which women, especially small women, are not targeted by sex traffickers, and 194,673 females under 21 are reported missing. Or simply, armed robbery rates don't exist in the world. It doesn't make you a good guy to be so unaware of why men would want to hurt women or how often they do. It makes you a dumbass, self-centered, and unaware of women's reality. What do you know? Look who it is. This is dumb. Yeah, this is stupid. This is dumb. And I would love to ask her about this. I would love to ask her about this and bring up the black comparison and say, would it make sense if we all just start doing this to black people too? Is that cool? You think that's good? Yeah, that's a good idea. Is it bigoted then? What about then? It's crazy she posts this and has a son. Yeah. Yeah, you would think. Or sorry, it's called not the predator syndrome. It's called the predator complex. That's what I made this phrase up, okay, but it's called the predator complex, where I talk about people treating men as though they are dangerous, so then men actually start acting like they are dangerous. They start treating themselves like they are dangerous when they're not. It's ridiculous. She was extreme in her reaction, but also all women have a story of being approached by a creepy man. Middle ground of be aware of your surroundings, but don't be weird. Sure, but not every woman has a story about being abducted in a freaking parking lot or being attacked on the streets. Most women do not have those stories. And the ones that do, they were attacked by people that they knew. They weren't attacked by some random person. They weren't attacked by some stranger coming up to them to ask them for directions. They were approached by somebody that they knew. They were beaten by somebody they knew. They were abducted by somebody that they knew, not a stranger. So we're like, once we add that into the mix, now we're lowering the statistics even more for some stranger to do this to you. It makes it even less likely now once we talk about the fact that it's more likely to happen with somebody that you know. I think she would agree. The way she talks about black people is weird. Damn. She is terrified, dude. She has bigger issues than being bigoted. I I had like I understand she's terrified, but there's lots of people who are actually terrified of black people, like unironically scared crapless. They somebody gets attacked by a black guy one time and then all of a sudden they're just terrified of black people and shaking every time they see a black person, and now they're freaking out and screaming every time they see a black person walking up to them. Like, no, I don't care. I don't care. Like, I understand that you have issues, you have PTSD, you're scared, like, this is possible and that's perfectly fine, but that doesn't make it acceptable. That doesn't mean that it's okay now. It can be understandable without being acceptable. You can say all you want, but if she would have been approached by Ted Bundy, she would have survived. Sure. And and if I scream at literally every person who ever approaches me ever, then I might have a better chance of surviving as well. Uh, but that's ridiculous and autistic, and uh, and I think everybody else has a right to be upset about it.
We
Well, I
don't know
brought
yet.
this back to confidence, and I think that even when he's giving his examples, it's still going to come down to confidence. Like a commander in an army screaming and yelling at everybody's faces, it'll likely come down to confidence, and I think it's likely or even expected that a smaller woman in a room of a bunch of bigger men will probably be less confident in those areas, and that would probably come down to a biological difference.
You could even say that she's just as confident, but she will be perceived as differently than a guy because there's our physical differences, which would make her be perceived as like more pretentious or like confused about her position because she's a tiny person yelling at a bunch of big guys. There's a lot of stuff going into that. But yeah, we don't have the answer if
I mean,
there's a
there is, but
biological
I literally see on Twitter like every day a bunch of women posting videos of how scared they are every time they're around men because men are biologically bigger and stronger, and so they're always scared every time they're around men. Like, I think it makes sense that women are going to be less confident when they're around a bunch of men.
Okay, Tom. So like you probably don't know this about me. I know that that's an argument that people make. I just don't make it because I personally can't identify with that to any
Okay,
extent
good,
at all. So
good.
like I can't even like I would like to steel man that. I just
Okay,
can't because I'm so like so far removed from that type of thinking. Like
all right.
I can't even. um I do think that there's like some level of subconscious fears, but to take that to the extent of like having any conscious thoughts relating like to fear of like size, i I want to steel man that, but I can't, so I'm just not going to. Like
Okay. Yeah, I shared on Twitter a video of a woman where a guy approached her in a
yeah, the
parking lot
parking lot,
yesterday.
right?
And yes, and she starts screaming and yelling, "You do not approach a woman in a parking lot. You do not approach a woman," and just like completely spazzed out. It's so good.
Do you want to
It's
talk about
ridiculous.
that?
I mean, we don't
See,
it's
this
up
is
to
what
you. I don't care.
frustrates me. Like, I know that it's unreasonable. It's also not feasible for society to
Hmm.
conduct itself that way.
Yeah.
So it's perceived as like, well, to an extent, I agree. I understand why people call it lunacy because it
Hmm.
feels like hysteria. But again, like, I think it's a really good example to how, let's say she is hysterical, okay? Let's say she's being completely unreasonable, completely unhinged, whatever you want to call that. It is really interesting that the way that we judge that is so, like, through an upset lens. Like you can just see that as like, oh, this woman has a very unreasonable fear of men, and she thinks men should never talk to women in a parking lot. Um, that doesn't seem like a very reasonable way to engage with reality.
Hmm.
Guess there's something wrong with this person. But instead, it's like these women are being hysterical. It's like, yes, this lady has issues.
Well, no, I mean,
Okay.
I understand like the idea of like, it's scary to be around people who are bigger and stronger than you. But my argument is the reason I shared it is because Lav defended the entire thing. And so I was like, this is ridiculous. And so I said,
Wait, is
you
Lav
know,
still doing panels?
I no, she shared it on Twitter. So
Oh,
she
okay.
posted
Yeah.
this video on Twitter, and so I reposted it. And the kind of my argument is like the one, because she's saying like women really do get abducted by men, and it's more likely for a man to abduct a woman than a woman to abduct a man, and they're bigger, they're stronger, blah blah blah. So it makes sense for her to be afraid. And so I was like, okay, well, do you know that like black men actually commit crimes at a higher rate, violent crimes?
Okay.
Do you know that they're actually like they have higher testosterone levels, so they build muscle more easily? They have
Jesus
lower
Christ.
body fat rates. They actually do
Tom,
better in sports where you run
question.
faster and jump higher. So does it make sense for white men to be afraid of black men now if this is the way that we think
Tom,
about these things? And I would assume she would still say no. But yeah, go ahead.
question. So, is the issue that this lady did a TikTok and she said men should never approach women in parking lots, or the issue is that she got spooked by a dude and then she yelled at him, "Don't come close to me"? Are both
She's
an issue? One of them is an issue? What's the exact issue here?
the woman said that men should not approach women when they're alone, especially not when they're with their son. But she said women should not approach women, or men should not approach women in parking lots as well.
Yeah,
But yeah.
that's like simply not a way we can tolerate as a society, and I'd also argue it's not the best way to move forward in terms of like gender relations and dynamics. I
Mhm.
think that if she had a fear response and she was like establishing and just saying, "Hey, don't come near me," I think that's a bit aggressive, and I would think, "Whoa, this person's a bit," but people are allowed to do that, you know. So
Sure.
I guess I think it's completely valid to say, hey, you can't make like societal prescriptions like this. It's completely unreasonable. Like, what if you dropped your wallet and a guy is trying to give you your wallet back and it's like, never approach me in a parking lot? No, no, lady, no. But so I guess if you're saying that it's not about like her establishing and having like a fear response, and it's just like the prescription, yeah, I agree, the prescription makes zero sense, and it's
Yeah, I
um
think it makes sense that people like get attacked by a black person and maybe irrationally are afraid of black people, but we wouldn't allow that to be a prescription afterwards. We would still say that that's not an okay thing. So, yeah. But all right,
okay.
you want to go to the next clip?